So I think we'd like to get started if everybody can take a seat. Just in case I forget, before I forget, there's a machine out there to put your parking tickets, your parking receipts in. And you get to pay $4 instead of $8, so you all want to remember to do that. It's right at the foot of the stairway right in front of us here. So welcome to the BLM Planning 2.0 listening session. My name is Mary Margaret Golton. I'm with a firm called CDR Associates in Colorado. We're doing the facilitation for this meeting, and a week ago, the meeting in Colorado, in Denver. We are not employees of the BLM, but we are neutral facilitators, and we like doing this, and we are appreciative of audience participation. And our job is to be sure that you have the best experience you can here. So please be letting us know. There are 4 people who work with CDR, as well as Leishan, who's in. Do you want to wave? Leishan and I are with CDR Associates in Denver, and then we have 4 local folks here who are being the facilitators for this, for the small groups. So first of all, I want to tell you the important people that are here from BLM that you need to know. Linda Lance, if you want to wave a hand. Oh, so the 3 are together, that's good. So Linda's the Deputy Director of the BLM. Brian Ami is the Branch Chief for Planning in NEPA. And Shasta Ferranto is the program manager, and Shasta and I have been the ones that have been planning and scheming and putting this together. To let you know, last week we had about 75 people in Denver, and then on the web, which is being managed by Leishan and others, there were about 100 people. So overall, we had like a couple of hundred people there. And I imagine we'll have close to that here. What I'd like to do at the beginning is tell you what the agenda will be. And you should all have an agenda for this meeting today. And I just want to let you know what it's going to be. We will end at 5, and we'll kind of apportion this agenda out so that everything gets done. The first thing that's going to happen after I do a quick overview here is a PowerPoint presentation that Shasta will be presenting, and it will give you an idea of what BLM intends and is planning and what Planning 2.0 is about. And you should be sure you jot down your questions and you have them already, because we will have a question and answer period, both for those of you on the telephone and those of you in the room, to clarify what you've seen in the PowerPoint. We're going to follow that up with a small group discussion in which we're going to ask you to give your ideas, your thoughts, your concerns, and so I'm going to suggest that you put your comments into 2 different pots. The first one is clarification about what you see in the PowerPoint. And then the second, we'll have discussions around 4 different tables about your ideas and your thoughts and your concerns about how the 2.0 planning process is going. And then we will bring a report from each of the small groups back to the big group. So there are really 2 opportunities for people to be heard. And there are a lot of people from BLM here. We'll have people at each of the tables to answer questions and to respond. But the main thing is what the title of this day is, and that's a listening session, and it's for BLM to listen to you and to what you think and what your ideas are and your concerns are. So that's what the small groups will be about. And at each small group, there will be a facilitator to manage the discussion. There'll be a BLM person there. We will record on the flip charts what some of the key ideas are. But at the end of this program, we will have notes, and those notes will be put into a larger report, which we at CDR will be producing, and that will be on the website, and will come to all of you who have left your emails with the folks at the front table. So if you have signed in and left your email address, you will either receive a copy of the report or you'll receive a link to where you'll find the report from these 2 meetings. So that's really an overview. At the end of the meeting today, we'll say again what the website is and how you can continue to be kept in touch, and we'll do a 2-second review of the meeting, what you thought about the meeting, how it went for you. This microphone, there are several of them floating around, and when you want to speak, there will be somebody around who will hand you the microphone, and it's important that you do that for several reasons. One is for the people that are calling in to hear. Another is that there will be a recording of this, which is an ADA requirement for the government, and also for each other to hear. You'll notice that this is sitting on my chin, and that's the reason, that's what you need to remember. If you talk like this, it's very hard for anybody to hear. You can't hear if it's out here or up here. And if it's too loud, our friends in the back there can tune it down. So please keep it right in front of your, right touching your chin, and then you'll be talking so that everyone can hear you. Facilitators, is there anything I've forgotten to say? I don't think. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shasta. Oh, sorry. Yes. First of all, there are 3 people from BLM that you're going to hear from, and the first is Linda Lance.
Yeah, thank you. And I didn't mean to leave you out. Please, I'm so insulted. I wanted to take 2 minutes because I know we want to get at it, but I wanted to just tell you on behalf of all of BLM, this is a really high priority for us. This planning, what we're calling Planning 2.0, but what it really means is planning better, more efficiently, and better for all the users of the land and for the landscape over the long haul, because our mission is sustainability, essentially, and we take that very seriously. So the main thing, we have some overarching goals that we're pretty certain about, but a lot of this is still to be written. And so having you here, we're very, very grateful for you taking the time on a Monday to be here. To be, Monday, Tuesday, right? I've been flying for a while. Guy, scary. And out of your day to be here, because your input is what's going to make this right. So we very, very much want you to speak your mind today. Tell us what you like and what you don't like about what we're doing, and be creative about what we can do better going forward. So thank you again very much for being here, and I look forward to talking to you all during the afternoon. And let me let Brian say hello as well.
Thank you, Linda. Do I have it on my chin? Okay. I have plethora of notes here to talk about. No, I am very excited that you're all here for this listening session. Planning 2.0 is kind of an evolution of things. I've been in the Bureau for over 30 years. I've been planning over nearly 25 of those 30 years, and I've seen things done well. I've seen things done not so well, and what we're really looking to is to institutionalize the things that go well. And so I'm pretty excited about this. It is an important project for the BLM to get done. And I think hopefully you guys will get excited about it as well and help us get to where we need to be. Without further ado, though, I will introduce Shasta to give you the PowerPoint presentation, then we will take it from there. And Shasta?
Can you hear me now? It helps to turn on the mic. All right, well, I just want to reiterate what Linda and Brian said. We're really pleased to have everyone here today, and we really appreciate you taking so much time in the middle of your day on a Tuesday to come and talk planning with us. So thank you again for being here. So what I'm going to do with this PowerPoint presentation, it's about half an hour long, and I'm just going to walk through some of the background of where Planning 2.0 came from, and then present some of our ideas of the direction that we think we'd like to go with it. And then we'll have time to get feedback from all of you and also hear some of your ideas that we might have missed. So just to start, resource management plans. the foundation of the work that BLM does. These plans provide a blueprint that guides all future management decisions, management actions on BLM public lands. So what ends up in these plans is very critical for the BLM looking forward. Resource management plans are required under FLTMA, the Federal Land Management and Policy Act, which is our organic act for the BLM, as I'm sure many of you in the room are aware of. And they're developed through a collaborative process, and I'll talk a little more about that collaborative process farther in this presentation. We have over 150 resource management plans and somewhere over 50 that are currently under development. Around 2000, the BLM started revising all of its existing resource management plans. And so over the last, 14 years, we've been going through the process of revising all of these plans. Most Western states include somewhere around 6 to 10 resource management planning areas. So Planning 2.0, where did this come from? Back in 2011, the BLM released a strategic plan. This plan, which was called the 2016 Roadmap for Success, it's available online at the link below. And I actually meant to say, and I forgot at the beginning, for the people who are tuned in on the web, this presentation is with the agenda that you can download on the right-hand link. If you go to the end of that handout, you can follow along with the presentation. And for those of you in the room, you can find it there later to get this exact web link. So back in 2011, the BLM came out with this strategic plan for how are we going to face the many challenges that we had moving forward, and how would we do this by the year 2016, so the next 5 years looking forward. One of the key priorities in this strategic plan was to develop a more proactive and nimble approach to planning. So a planning approach that would allow us to work collaboratively with our partners to respond to change and to do so across multiple scales, because as we all know, resources occur at different scales. This plan also called for the BLM to put together a chartered team of BLMers from the field offices, state offices, and Washington office to develop recommendations on how to do this, how to develop a better planning process. So since 2011, this team has been working on coming up with these recommendations and setting the stage for what we now call Planning 2.0. Part of what this team did to start off was an internal assessment. So they went back and they did an overview of BLM's current planning process. So looked at how long the plans are taking, how much the plans are costing, and so forth. They also did an extensive litigation review to see where these plans were challenged, and then they developed recommendations that led to the project goals. Simultaneously, the BLM has been moving towards a landscape approach to public lands management. The BLM recognizes that our public lands face many complex challenges that transcend traditional land boundaries. Things like wildfire, for example, invasive species, the need for energy development. I could go on and on, the list is exhaustive, but these areas don't just stop at the political boundaries of our field offices or even BLM land. And so this landscape approach has been a bureau-wide approach to try to figure out how to manage our public lands, looking at the landscape as a whole. This includes landscape scale assessments. Some of you may have been involved in these. These are our RIAs, or Rapid Eco-Regional Assessments, which are basically a data gathering effort at a landscape scale, at the eco-regional scale. It also includes regional mitigation strategies, so looking at mitigation at the regional level, monitoring for adaptive management so we can respond to change, geospatial data integration. I'm going to keep coming back to the geospatial data because this is really a critical part of this landscape approach. If you don't have the data to support looking at a landscape and looking at multiple landscapes, or if you have data that doesn't speak to the data set at another boundary, then you can't make these sort of landscape decisions. You can't answer landscape level questions. So data is really integral towards this. And then science integration, using the best available science to make our management decisions. Planning 2.0 is an important part of this landscape approach. In Planning 2.0, what we'd like to accomplish is being able to implement the landscape approach in our planning process. I'm going to talk to you a little more about some of our ideas on how to do that. And we're like Linda said, we're very open to all of your ideas on how to do this as well. So the project goals for Planning 2.0. Mary Margaret mentioned that also I should talk about why we came up with the name Planning 2.0. What it's really meant to be is this is our next step in planning. The last time our planning regulations and our planning handbook had any changes was back in 2005. So 2.0 is our next step in making these changes. So our project goals. The first is to create a more dynamic and efficient planning process. So what we mean by this is we'd like to have a planning process that can respond to change when it happens, whether that be economic change, environmental change, social change, whatever it might be. We'd like to have a process that can respond to it. And more so, we'd like to be able to respond in a timely manner when the response is still meaningful and helpful. The second one, opportunities for collaborative planning. Collaborative planning is very important to our BLM planning process. This is already fundamental to the process, engaging both the public, the many stakeholders, and our cooperating agencies. What we'd like to do in Planning 2.0 is find ways to do this even better, to do this more upfront, and to engage our partners and the public in the way that's most meaningful for our partners and most useful for the planning process and the decision making. I'll talk more in the later slides about what our ideas are with that. And then the third, planning across landscapes and at multiple scales. So we want to be able to implement this landscape approach. We want to be able to respond to these landscape level challenges like the ones I mentioned earlier, wildfire, et cetera. And we want to have a method when resources do occur and have needs at different scales to consider that at different scales and be able to respond to it accordingly. So this is a very, very simplified schematic of the project coming up. As you'll see, and this is in your handout, we're at the very beginning of identifying potential changes. Like I said, we've had a lot of groundwork going into leading up to this, but now we're at the beginning of really moving forward and thinking about the details of how we do this. And so that's the reason why we're coming out and doing these listening sessions with all of you now, is because we want to engage people up front and get your ideas early in the process. The next step is that sometime we're hoping around spring 2015, we'll come out with a proposed rule. So we're actually taking a look at our land use planning regulations and making targeted revisions to those regulations. We're not rewriting and throwing out all of the planning regulations, but we're going in and we'd like to make targeted changes to update and revise those regulations. Sometime around summer 2015, we'd hope to come out with a draft land use planning handbook. So this is the policy outside of the regulations, which are pretty focused and not extensive, more, how do I say, higher level policy. Our land use planning handbook is where a lot of the detail of our planning policy is. It's a big document, and it's really the meat of how you do planning. And so that draft of our new handbook will come out in summer 2015, we hope. There will be the final rule sometime around spring of 2016, and then the final handbook sometime around summer 2016. I'd also like to apologize. In your handout, this says 2015. That's just a typo. It's actually supposed to be 2016. And then at the end of the project, we'd move into the implementation of Planning 2.0, which would involve things like developing training for our staff, and so forth to implement this effectively. So, some preliminary ideas of how we think we might meet some of these goals. The first goal, create a more dynamic and efficient planning process. First is we're looking for ways to do adaptive management and integrate this into our plans. So to be able to actually do some upfront groundwork so that our plans can can respond to change without triggering a full plan amendment. So doing some of that analysis up front. There are some examples where the BLM is already doing this. The DRECP, the Desert Renewable Energy and Conservation Plan, I believe has some of this in there. The Solar Programmatic EIS has done some of this. I know the Sage Grouse effort is also trying to implement or integrate adaptive management. So this is something the BLM is already moving towards, and we'd like to do that even better. The second one, earlier public and stakeholder collaboration. I'll talk about this even more on those upcoming slides that I keep referencing. But basically, involving the public and the stakeholders earlier in the process so we can really get that critical information right up front and finding out things like data collection, setting priorities, values, all that information. The earlier that we can get that and have a discussion and a dialogue about that, we think the better the planning process, the more smoothly it'll go in the end. And then third, an improved amendment process. And we don't know yet what this would look like, so we're really open to everyone's ideas and feedback. But the idea is that, of course, with adaptive management, we would hope that fewer amendments might be triggered because we've thought about some of it and done some analysis up front. But there's always going to be a need for some amendments. There's always going to be unforeseeable circumstances, change that comes, whatever it might be. And so when we do need an amendment, we want to make sure that we do it in the most efficient way that is still meaningful and valuing the process, the planning process. The second goal, enhanced opportunities for collaborative planning. So along with the earlier stakeholder and public participation, we're also going to look at some new opportunities for participation. Improved use of web technology. Obviously, with the live stream, we're all just thrilled about how that's able to engage people from afar in these meetings. And we'd like to continue to develop these sort of web ideas. A few examples for web participation with the Solar Programmatic EIS. They've developed web-based mapping called Solar Mapper, and you can actually get on and see the allowable uses in a map, a web-based map, anyone from the public. And we'd like to be able to apply something like that more broadly across our plans. Another example, currently with the protest process, a member of the public can only submit a protest in writing. That's actually written into our regulations that it has to be in hard copy, and we can't accept a digital version. So we'd like to be able to accept digital versions of protests. It'd be easier for us, and we think it'd be easier for all of you as well. And I could go on and on with the web technology, but again, moving into the, the 21st century now? Moving into the 21st century. And then the third, continuing to actively engage cooperating agencies in plan development. This is less of something new and more just a recognition that cooperating agencies are integral towards our planning process. The BLM back in 2005, I believe it was, revised our planning regulations then to create a bigger role for cooperating agencies through the plan development. And we want to continue to have that role because we feel that it's vital to get that local, state and local engagement throughout our planning process. The third goal, plan across landscapes and at multiple scales. So as we move forward with our plans, as you know, since 2000, I mentioned, we've been revising all of our plans. We don't plan to throw all those plans out the day Planning 2.0 is completed in 2 years. We still want those plans to live their full life. A lot of work was gone into developing them, both by the BLM as well as all of our stakeholders and our public. But when it is time to revise a new plan, we'd like to reconsider the boundaries of those future plans, and if they're the most logical, are the boundaries of the current planning area responsive to the resource needs in the area? And if not, perhaps we can redefine the planning area boundary to match the resources a little better, as well as the uses. The second, higher level plans that are focused on landscape goals and land use allocations. So as our plans move towards this landscape view, what we believe is that they're going to get bigger, right? There's more geographic area, and so that just means that it's a bigger document. Our plans are already huge. I'm sure all of you know this. What we believe is that if we want to go up in geographic area, we have to take some of that detail out of our plans. This very detailed, prescriptive, what we call implementation level, so very site-specific, out of our plans. A good example would be travel management planning, very detailed site-specific route designations. That doesn't mean that we're not going to do that type of planning anymore. We still need to do that type of planning. The question is the resource management plan the appropriate place to do it? Or would it make more sense to take this higher level look and then tier the more detailed local decisions to that higher level look? And then the third point here is we'd like to have an increased emphasis on geospatial data-driven plans. As I mentioned before, data is just critical to all of this. If you're going to coordinate across boundaries, then you have to be able to speak across boundaries with your data sets. We also want to have our plans in an environment, like I gave the example of Solar Mapper, where somebody can actually get online, click in a map, and find the information they need about what the allowable uses are in that area. So moving into this geospatial environment is really important. So what might this process look like? So this is a difficult at first glance, but I'm going to walk you through the schematic. So on our left, this is a conceptual model of our current decision making in an RMP. So historically, in our BLM RMPs, we have a few different decisions we make. We identify goals, we identify objectives, and we identify allowable use and management actions, and so forth. Typically, this is done for each program area. So an example would be for wildlife, for minerals, for livestock grazing. So what you get, we like to call it the stovepipe effect. Basically, each program has its different goals, objectives, allowable uses, and management actions. The problem with this is that the goals, because they're developed separately from each other, they may not always match up perfectly, or they might be redundant, or they could even be in conflict with each other. And that's not a good way to do it. The way that we're thinking of moving towards, and again, this is just conceptual, is trying to come up with a more integrated way to think about our RMP decisions. So going out and looking at landscape goals. So what are the priorities in this landscape? That could be, where are our important areas for wildlife habitat, migration corridors? Where are our priority areas for energy development? Where are these important areas across the landscape? And then developing goals for those priority areas. You could call it landscape priorities, you could call it the landscape vision, you could call it the landscape direction, but basically taking this landscape look. Then setting objectives that are designed to meet that landscape vision, and trying to get rid of some of the redundancy. So rather than having program-specific objectives, we have these integrated objectives that are all going to meet these landscape goals. And then finally, within the resource management plan, you would still address the allowable uses and the management actions, and I believe you'd still have to do it by program area, and even, I shouldn't say have to, but want to, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to know, program by program, what's allowed on the land, what we're actually going to do in the RMP, but these would be designed so that they're all working towards our landscape priorities, rather than the priorities of perhaps that specific program. So now I kept referencing those new collaborative opportunities. This is the slides where I'm going to walk you through it. This is our current planning process, a simplified, very simplified diagram of it. So we have two phases. The RMP development and the RMP review is what I'm calling it. So we issue our notice of intent in the Federal Register. We go out to public scoping. It's the first time we go out to the public. We assess the management situation, so we gather the various data sets that we need to do our plan. We develop our NEPA alternatives, and then we prepare the draft plan. The second phase, we come out with our notice of availability for the draft plan in the Federal Register, announcing that it's ready. We have a formal public comment period, revise the plan, and then go through our protest, governor's consistency review, and the final decision. So this is a possible revised process that we've been trying to think through. So in the revised process, there'd be more emphasis on this pre-planning phase, which we don't currently have an emphasis on in our planning process. So we'd start by evaluating the existing management. Is the existing management working? What's the need for the plan? I should point out, I see a few people taking pictures. This is in your handout, so you have a copy of this in front of you if you picked one up on the outside. Then after you've assessed the need for the plan revision and what needs to be revised, you'd go out and do some sort of pre-planning outreach with the public. This is when I'm envisioning that you would set that landscape vision, that landscape direction, really trying to ascertain what's important in this planning area. Is this boundary even correct? And doing that in a collaborative, transparent stakeholder process. Back in Denver, one of the comments that was brought up is, well, who would be involved in this pre-planning? And the idea is that this would be open to everyone. This would be an attempt to bring everyone to the table that was interested in this area so that we could do this in a collaborative way. We'd then assess the management situation. So this would be that data gathering. So this is a little different than how we do it now. Normally we do this after scoping now. This idea is that we'd be doing this before scoping. So you'd actually be doing all your data collection to inform the scoping process, to have a more meaningful scoping process. This would also include trying to go out to public and partners and stakeholders and asking if people had, what data sets are out there that we can use. So trying to have a really robust data gathering effort to make sure that we have all of the best available information at the get-go. Then you'd publish your notice of intent. So this is the formal start to the plan. I'd like to point out that even though I have these stages here, there's a part of planning that's always a little bit iterative. So just because you've done this data assessment here, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be bringing in new data later on in the process. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't still be reconsidering this vision if you needed to. So there is some iteration to this. But you would have done a lot more thinking up front and put more pre-thought into it. Go out to scoping and have a more informed scoping process. So you have this assessment of the management situation with your maps and your data. We have this idea of what are the priorities, and then have an in-depth discussion about what are the planning issues moving forward. What do we really want to analyze in this plan? Formulate the NEPA alternatives. And then this is also a new idea. Do some sort of outreach on those alternatives. Right now, when we develop our plans, there's really no opportunity between scoping and this public comment period for the public to see what's in that plan. So we think it would be helpful to actually have an opportunity to reach out to the public and share kind of midway through, here's what we're thinking is in the alternatives, and getting a little feedback. This would be an opportunity to see if we missed anything, if there's a better data source out there or whatnot, before you actually get to that formal public comment period, which is much more structured. And then this last column hasn't changed. It would still be the same process that we go through now. So I talked through some of this in the last slide, but just to reiterate, we'd start by evaluating existing management and management concerns. So questions like, is existing management working? And if the answer is yes, maybe we don't need to consider revising that part of the plan. Maybe we can do a much more targeted plan revision. Are there resource management concerns? What is the anticipated scope of the planning effort? And what is the anticipated planning area boundary? As I mentioned, we might want to reconsider these planning area boundaries so that we can look at this landscape view if more appropriate. The collaborative pre-planning outreach. So what resources and multiple uses are important in the planning area, and where are they important? What is our long-term vision for the landscape as a community and many different groups that are coming together and interested in this area? What's our vision? Is the planning area boundary and the scope of the planning effort appropriate to reach this vision? And what data is available for this planning effort? These are a few examples of where data sources might come from. So a plan evaluation that the BLM does internally, the RIAs, the eco-regional assessments that I talked about earlier, data from cooperators, monitoring data that the BLM collects and a wide variety of other data sources such as citizen science or data provided by other groups. We do the assessment, and then this all informs the public scoping process to have a more informed dialogue when we go into scoping about what the next steps are. And then finally, alternatives outreach. Is the range of alternatives complete, or is something missing? And are the goals, the landscape goals that we've developed, are they consistent with each other, or are there some inherent conflicts that need to be addressed before we move forward? So to summarize, how is this approach different? One, collaborative pre-planning. This is a new idea that we're putting out here, and we'd really like all of your feedback on whether you think this is a good idea or not. And then this alternatives outreach. So going out to the public sometime before we release the draft plan. I forgot to mention this before, but I should say that a lot of these ideas, for example, the alternatives outreach, have been done already in different BLM planning efforts. I know Western Oregon is an example where they did this alternatives outreach, and it was very successful. So a lot of these are trying to take these ideas and these new ideas and apply them more broadly across the BLM and more consistently. The second is doing more focused plans. So if we can do this pre-planning outreach and as a community, and I mean that in a broader sense of anyone who wants to be at the table for this planning area, if we can develop a vision and decide that some areas of our management are already working, we don't need to readdress them, and other areas need to be addressed, perhaps we can do more focused plans that can be completed a little more quickly. Landscape level goals or direction and integrated resource and use objectives. So trying to get away from the program by program, more stovepiped approach and towards a more integrated resource management plan. And then less prescriptive plans. So trying to pull some of that very site specific detail and take this higher level look and then tier to the site specific detailed look. And then finally, looking for ways to implement adaptive management. So being able to think a little more up front and have ways to respond to change when it happens, and it always will happen. So that's the end of my presentation. At this point, I'm going to bring Linda and Brian back up, and then I think we'll take questions from all of you on what we've presented. Thank you.
Let's have it. What are you thinking? And as soon as you raise your hand, somebody will put a microphone. Okay, so you're number one, sir.
And I commend you for the work that you put into it. Looks like you put a lot of thought into it. I do have one massive concern, though, and this deals with your data. When you talk about collecting data, I have concerns about where the data is coming from and who is reviewing it to ensure that it is valid, that it is correct, and not somebody's doctoral thesis that was rejected. You know, it's something that has got to be meaningful, has got to be peer-reviewed, and has got to have some relevance to the discussion and to the topic areas. And to go along with that is that you talk about landscape level. What's a landscape? This is something I keep, see, I've been through the Forest Service with these kind of discussions, and I keep asking, well, what's your landscape? Nobody can address what a landscape is. And if you try to pin people down, they come up with different concepts. Now, you talk about changing landscape boundaries or plan boundaries, that's fine. I agree that it's something that you need to do to look at it, make it more efficient and more effective in the long run. So, anyway, there's just a couple, I've got a lot more concerns too, so I'll let somebody else have it.
Should I respond to that?
Yeah, really, is this on? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Great. So, great comments. You know, data is a very important aspect of this whole thing. My personal dream is to bring land use planning into a geospatial environment. And you need good corporate data for that, and we need good data standards, which the BLM is working on. There are authoritative sources for data with all the different agencies. The state wildlife agencies are authoritative data sources. BLM has, you know, the land tenure type of data sources, and so we get our data from a lot of places. There's a lot of groups out there doing studies and gathering data, but it is very important that the data is of high quality and is that has appropriate metadata with it, and you know, all the things that really pertain to data, and that is absolutely very important to the whole planning effort. When we talk about, you know, what is a landscape, landscape is actually defined in the Department of Interior's strategy on regional mitigation. But if you saw in the PowerPoint, we're talking about planning across landscapes. We're not necessarily trying to define a landscape boundary, but how do we plan across various landscapes and jurisdictions that we can get more of a, you know, a unifying way of even the stakeholders, the local governments and their objectives in and moving forward to the same way. Those boundaries will change depending on the issues. An example of that is the current sage grouse effort that came through fairly quickly. We have a lot of plans involved in that, but we're planning across different state boundaries, county boundaries. In sharing that data, we've knocked down a lot of firewalls between agencies to share data, made a lot of strides there, but it's really, you know, taking those issues, and then in that case, you got a 50 million acre landscape for the range of the sage grouse that we're planning across, but the next issue that comes up may be something else. For the solar energy, it was a much smaller type of situation, so those boundaries are going to change with the issues. It really is, where do you have common issues, common data, and those kind of things that help define those landscapes.
Brian, thank you. Who's next? Great ahead.
My name is Russ Enos. I'm the Executive Director of the National Off-Highway Vehicle Conservation Council, but I've also spent the last 2 years as a member of the Federal Advisory Committee for the Forest Service Planning Rule. And going through or listening to the presentation and the discussion, there are a tremendous number of parallels between the Forest Service Planning Rule and what you guys have in mind. So I have about 100 questions because I spent 2 years, you know, in depth with that rule, but I'm trying to narrow it down to just a couple. And I guess the one that comes to mind is, are you guys coordinating at all with the Forest Service on their planning rule? Because there's been a lot, you know, there are already 5 early adopters and then a bunch of mid adopters that are going through the process. And there's been a tremendous amount of learning, particularly about the concept of adaptive management and how that's going to work. And is that a process that you guys are actively engaged in?
Yes, never know how far to hold it. Yes, we are coordinating with the Forest Service. We've met with Brian, myself, and a few others back in DC, have met with several of the people that worked on the planning rule and also several of the people that are now working on the directives that are coming out to get their lessons learned, and we're continuing to meet with them to learn from what they've done.
Okay, and then the last question, there's a lot of terminology that you use that's different, but when I look at the Forest Service rule, there are processes that have the same meaning but different names. Is there going to be an effort by the BLM to maybe standardize that? Because a lot of people are involved in both BLM and Forest Service processes. Could it be simplified by learning from those or changing some of the terminology?
Yeah, you may have noticed some of that we already are trying to use some of the same terminology. For example, the assess the management situation. We've always called it analyze the management situation. And we think assess is actually a more appropriate word and more consistent with the Forest Service. Some of the challenge, I think, moving forward is finding that balance between trying to be as consistent as we can with their language, but then there are some areas where our planning process is different, and so there will be some different uses of language that BLM probably only uses. Okay, but I welcome, in the listening session, I welcome your ideas and how we can make it more consistent.
Okay, and this is my last question. So one of the things that we've struggled with on the Forest Service rule is the adaptive management relies on a rapid assessment and keeping it rapid so it doesn't grow out of control. And then the other key element is monitoring, and monitoring is a fairly expensive process. And are you guys fairly confident that you can support both of those things in a continuous cycle to assure that adaptive management would work?
So the monitoring is something that we have an initiative that's been going on for several years now. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but that's our AIM, Assessment, Inventory, and Monitoring Strategy. I'm not intimately involved with that effort, but I know that they are moving towards trying to figure out how to monitor and collect data using statistically robust samples, but in a way that has, the fewest sample locations you can while still having it be statistically robust. And we're trying to move bureau-wide towards that effort. So with Planning 2.0, our hope is that we can work hand in hand with this AIM strategy that's been going on for several years to make sure that they're collecting the data we need to do adaptive management. I missed, what was your first half of that? I'm sorry.
I used to pretty well. The first thing was the assessment.
Oh.
One of the things that happens is in an adaptive management cycle. On the Forest Service side, the assessment.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, the assessment on the Forest Service planning rule relies heavily on existing data, and because it's kind of a new process, everybody wants to include everything, so it becomes burdened with that desire and becomes cumbersome and is no longer rapid. So do you have a strategy, or are you aware that that's something you'll need to address?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to touch on our rapid eco-regional assessment process that we're going through. And while it doesn't collect everything under the sun, it does focus on key change agents that are out there. And quite a few of the RIA areas have been completed, and they're going to provide a lot of the context for our data in future planning. There's still a few RIAs left to do. So that's part of what feeds into the whole monitoring and assessment and everything like that. So I think, didn't we just release another one recently for, yeah, but the Great Basin has been done in Colorado states and the Arctic, everywhere.
Thanks. So put your hands up and you'll get a microphone. So you'll be 1, 2, but before we do there's one, Liz has some people on the phone, and so I'm going to let her ask some questions, and then I've got 1, 2, and then 3.
Okay, so we got a question by email, and it's a 2-part question. So number 1 is, it seems like the stovepipe method to planning is incongruent with an integrative landscape approach. Can the BLM conceive of a way to incorporate the current RMP decisions into landscape goals and objectives before they are set to expire, given that some of these RMPs will not be fully revised for 20 to 30 years?
Well, I think we're already doing that, and some of the examples would be, I've talked about a few, but I guess I shouldn't look at you. The solar PEIS is one example. So it went through and amended, I don't know how many off the top of my head, but many plans at once. The sage grouse amendments are another example where they're amending many, many plans across the BLM. So taking, for these specific resources, the landscape, which is across multiple planning areas, and doing a targeted amendment. So I think that would be one way that we're going to continue to look at the existing plans and have to assess landscapes before we're actually revising the whole plan.
Good, thanks. How many do you have, Liz?
Just one more.
Okay, why don't you go ahead?
And so the second part of this question is, as Shasta mentioned, the BLM has traditionally taken a stovepipe approach to planning with various uses not integrating in a cohesive manner. This has also left conservation or restoration of uses as an afterthought instead of looking at opportunities for conservation priority areas before the various uses are allocated. Does BLM see conservation as a part of the multiple use and sustained yield mission and something that should be allocated at the landscape level through the planning process?
Thanks. That's a great question. And I think what we're trying to get at when we talk about landscape priorities and landscape direction is really taking this look at conservation and development and all the other uses and whatnot that we have on our public land, and doing it at the same time. So looking at where our priority areas are for conservation, at the same time that we look at where priority areas are for development, so that you can identify those conflicts and work through that up front and early on. Did you want to?
Sorry, I just got one more question from the web, and that's just that if speakers from the audience could identify themselves for the people who are on the phone and listening in.
Great, thank you. I think that's reminds me of something I should have been doing. Okay, number 1 is back here, number 2, and then you're number 3. Okay.
Hey, Amy Granite, I'm Managing Director of the California Off-Road Vehicle Association, and my colleague Russ has been involved in a federal level with Forest Service land use planning. I've been involved in the California level on the land use planning with the planning rule through a process, a community process we call the Sierra Cascades Dialogue, and I'm on the steering committee. We have also seen all the pitfalls. And one of my pet peeves has been, a couple of things. First, it has to be looked at in a very holistic manner. One of the mistakes in all the land use planning, regardless of agency, that I've seen over time is that here is this use, this is this use, this is this use, this is this use. Well, people don't work that way. People, even if you're a cattle grazer, you're going to access it through a road. If you're a mineral extractor, you're going to use a road to get there in some way, shape, or form. If you're a rock hounder, you're going to use a truck or somewhere to get out to where you want to collect rocks. So people, that's not considered OHV use. So then when they go to do the OHV plan, they forget about all these other people. Hunters, people, equestrians who drive trailers, they're never considered. So it has to be considered in what are people expecting to be able to do in an area. And that seems to get last. But this best available science thing really bugs me because, first of all, I've never heard anybody go, let's use the worst available science. It doesn't happen. But science can be rigged very, very easily, in fact, I've found. You can publish papers. And the average person does not have a group that goes around and have their own scientists and biologists that publish papers. We just don't do that. We don't even think that way. The average rural town that is either right next to BLM land or depends on BLM land for tourism or income, they don't have biologists on staff to do that, but yet other organizations do have that. So socioeconomic resources have to be looked at, not necessarily at the best available science, because it's very compartmentalized where that science is available. And best available science is great, but if the science doesn't exist, it doesn't mean the use is unimportant or that the use doesn't exist. So it's a cautionary tale that I would request you to look at.
So it sounds as though your suggestions, it's Amy, right? Amy, are 2 suggestions for them to think about. You're not so much looking for a response right here, or are you?
Well, I guess my question would be, you've mentioned a couple of times best available science. What is your vision of it? What is your definition?
Yeah, the best available sciences certainly can be argued a lot of different ways, but the BLM really relies on the definition of the Data Quality Act, which is high quality data. And we are developing peer review policies within the agency. Science that does come out as a published form needs to be peer reviewed. We just don't take anybody's paper and say, oh, this is the science, let's follow it. It has to be looked at in a broader context of where that science fits into the issues and the resources at hand. And so I'm not going to settle on any one definition of best available data other than we are required by law to use high quality data and information in the decisions that we make.
So what if the data doesn't exist for the areas that you have to put in a study, or you want to put in a study?
Could you repeat that?
What if the data, peer-reviewed studies don't exist for an area, particularly in socio-economic concerns?
Well, we will use the data that is at hand, of course. In social and economic data, we have actually hired several more zone positions of social and economic staff throughout the West to help ensure that we are doing our social and economic background with the planning effort. We try to hold a lot of public sessions with folks and workshops on social and economics. So we get to the local end of things and see how that all fits in. So,
Thanks, Brian.
I was just going to add, I would hope by doing that, what we're calling the assessment or assess the management situation earlier and up front, that would be an opportunity to identify some of those areas where there are gaps. I would think this would be something that public data, citizen science, for an example, could help us to know where there's a gap where we don't have perhaps peer-reviewed information, but maybe a user group collects information there and they can say, you know, our data says this, so this is an area where your data has a gap. And by going through that assessment earlier, I think it could be really beneficial as for everyone to be engaged in helping us to fill in those gaps or identify them.
Thank you. Yes, you're next. The guy behind you with the beard, yeah.
John Stewart with the California Association of Four-Wheel Drive Clubs. Just wanted to touch on a couple of things. When you talk about that monitoring, you brought up a topic of statistically significant sampling, and that triggers a red flag to me in that when you look at landscape approaches and start looking at statistically significant samples, I'd encourage you to ensure that your sampling will scale across the landscape and that you do not begin making landscape decisions based on a statistically significant sample that applies to one small thing without scaling across the landscape. Like I said, that's just a red flag that came up there. And also, as you move along, especially looking at an adaptive management process, it is, and you talk about your eco-regional assessments, is that you're grabbing all kinds of data. How do you know what data is going to be important? And here's where, from past experience of 20 plus years working in quality management systems, is what you decide to manage today, you will find in 5 years is the wrong data, and you need to monitor something else. So it's just something as you move forward and look at, be created to the point where you're flexible enough to shift your monitoring strategies, but not so to the point where you're wasting a lot of time. And it's a challenge.
Thank you. Those are great comments.
Okay, you're number 3. Yep.
Actually, my name is Dave, not number 3.
Dave, where are you from? The telephone audience wants to know where people are from as well. Your name and what you do.
Dave Pickett, Pioneer, California, District 36 Motorcycle Sports Committee.
Thank you.
You're welcome. On page 2 of the pass-out second paragraph, it indicates that this preliminary framework, the BLM, would still identify specific allowable uses.
Can you move your mic up a little?
Which is fine. My question is the next sentence says, these use decisions will be shaped by landscape level priorities. Who sets these priorities?
Oh, good question. Who sets the landscape level priorities?
That's a great question. The landscape level priorities would be developed through the collaborative process. So I think that conversation would start during pre-planning when we did the pre-planning outreach, but would move into scoping. So it would be a collaborative process to set those priorities.
Can you say anything more? Could we have a mic over here? Thanks. Okay, you're next after him.
Hello, my name is Ted Cabral, and I'm one of the California State Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Commissioners. I was appointed by the governor of our state to represent all of the people of California on OHV recreation use in the state of California. With that is, as I look around the room, I see many people that I often see at meetings like this, so it's familiar faces, which is great. I love seeing everybody. But the fact is, though, it was made very important to me by the governor's office that I'm supposed to represent all of the people, whether they are a recreationalist or not. And I'm glad to see that you guys are looking at having improved technology to get more involvement. But what also, as I look around the room, I mean, the demographics of the people in this room, I can't tell who's on the internet, but the demographics certainly aren't the demographics of the state of California. It's not even close. So with that in mind, as I'm looking at your pre-planning process, the pre-planning outreach, what I've observed is the best source to get the information on the proper demographics is at the county level. So the county government and county representatives seem to be the best, conduit for the federal government to be able to get that information. So with that, I was just wondering how in the pre-planning outreach are you going to engage the local county officials?
Can I make a comment? One of the things I want to point out again to all of you is that in a minute we'll be in small groups and you're going to be asked that question, like what in the county, how would you best want to involve people in the counties? So I appreciate you're asking that of them now, and then we'll be asking that of you in a minute.
Great, thank you. And again, I would welcome your ideas. I think one of the most important ways that we currently involve local government, such as the counties, is through the cooperating agency relationship. This is a unique relationship because they get invited into parts of our planning process that other members of the public are not able to participate in. So I would think that that relationship would be able to be used during pre-planning as well.
Counties have always been important in BLM planning. We reach out to counties through NACO, the National Association of Counties. We also reach out to the National Association of Conservation Districts. County commission meetings, our field managers are regular members of their board meetings, and we always have an ongoing dialogue with our counties. And you are correct, that is a great place to get the information that we need. And we use them as cooperating agencies on some of the local agencies within the counties and state and local governments as well.
Add one thing. I think this past series of questions has really demonstrated the challenge for us, which is these goals are great, we think, but to carry them out on the ground is a whole different thing, and it's going to be very hard to do, and we know that. And that's why we're here today, early in this process, to try to reach out to you all to say, we know we don't have all the answers in making this work right now. You guys are going to need to help us, and people who are not in this room, as you very correctly point out, are going to need to help us too. And so we're looking for ideas as to how to reach the full range of Americans. And we're very proud to have a role in taking care of this land, but we're very conscious of the fact that this land is everybody's, and it's a great gift to Americans. And so we want to manage it correctly. And when you get down on the ground, it's a lot harder than when you sit back in DC and write the goals. So that's why we're here. And I urge you to think creatively, not just today, but going forward, and to help us do the best job we can in really implementing this.
Thanks so much, Linda.
Can I?
Yeah.
One other point, some behind the scenes work that I didn't talk about and isn't posted on our website is we are reaching out through the Planning 2.0 process to, for example, we're going to do a webinar with NACO in a few weeks to get very similar to this style. We'll share this presentation and we'll have a robust discussion. We met with the Western Governors Association in Denver last week. So there is a lot of behind the scenes work happening with state and local government that isn't part of these public sessions.
Great, thanks. You're up.
Thank you.
Katie, could you give a mic
Petlock
over
with
there?
the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this sort of priority setting issue, and we're talking about landscape level planning here. The gentleman asked about who's going to set these priorities, and you said, well, it's going to be this collaborative process. But I think that, as you look around the West, for example, we see, and I think the fundamental reason why we're even here having this conversation at all is because we have these competing interests. We have energy, we have, grazing, we have off-road vehicles, we have sportsmen, we have, on and on. And oftentimes these specific interests are in conflict with each other. And one of the big issues that we've seen in BLM planning over the years, or well, there's a couple. I think one is that there's a lot of inconsistency across the landscape in terms of from one district office to another. And we see oftentimes where the priorities that are being set may not, the priorities in Wyoming, for example, with regard to energy development are different than the priorities in the Battle Mountain District of Nevada with cattle grazing, or the priorities of the White River District in Colorado with wildlife conservation. And this idea of having this collaborative approach, the thing that sort of worries me about that is that if the collaborative approach means that whichever special interest that has the most political influence wins out, and the other problem is that the durability of these plans is if you make it so that it's really easy to amend, we can just amend, then these plans don't really mean anything because they shift back and forth from as the political winds shift and different interest groups increase or decrease in their political power. You end up seeing these sort of haphazard kinds of planning that may look good on the front end, but when you track it over time, it has very little durability and very little consistency. So I think my question really has more to do with how do you deal with the situation where you have this collaborative approach, and the collaborative says, let's just take an example and say in the Battle Mountain District of Nevada, where cattle grazing is a fairly prominent use, probably one of the more powerful political interests, and they say, we go through this collaborative, and they say, well, we want to say that grazing is the priority, and that priority conflicts with the sage grouse habitat priority. And yet, so I guess the question is, what's the method or what's the process going to be in terms of determining where the highest priorities are in these landscape planning, and then how are you going to maintain that durability over time so that it's not just something that the next administration comes along and it all goes out the window and we're back to drill baby drill or whatever else it is that might come along.
That's a very hard question. One thing I would say, this probably won't answer your whole question, but to me, when we say collaborative process, part of the responsibility of doing that is making sure that all the voices are at the table, not just a few, which can be challenging to get everyone to the table. But that, I think, is a critical piece to make sure that it is truly a collaborative process. I don't know if either of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm relatively new to the BLM, but I've seen the staff that works on this. That is the absolute essence of what they do now. And I think they're some of the best in the world at doing it, because that's what they do for a living, which is to not just to try to find a way of managing competing interests and uses, but to make sure that all of those uses are heard from, even those who don't have a very strong voice. And that isn't a political choice that's made. That's something that's done by career BLM people, traditionally. And I think it's the essence of what BLM does. We manage for multiple use. So the key is to make sure that we understand what all of those uses are, and not respond only to the loudest voice. Yeah. So I think that is an iterative process. You try to get better and better at that over time and learn from what you've done. And I think this is a real next step in that. What I think is job one for BLM is to try to do that better, to try to figure out. We do it now. We know we can do it better. And one of the challenges, and you pointed out again, we're looking for good ideas and help. these plans now take 6 to 8 years to do, and by the time you're talking about durability, by the time they're durable in the sense that it takes us 8 years to even do them. So by the time they're finished, things have changed, as you point out, and the challenge is how to adapt to that change. So that's where we're trying to head. We're trying to grapple with some of those challenges that we know very much are there. But we're not here today to say we have all the answers and it's going to be perfect going forward. But we think that we learn by listening, and that's what we're going to try to do better than we've done in the past. And I frankly think, as somebody new who looks kind of, with fresh eyes at the longtime career BLM employees who do this for a living, they know how to do it. They listen already. They try to find the collaborative, but I think we can do that better, and that's what we're working toward.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, yes, right here.
Yeah, Nicholas Harris. I'm the Western States representative for the American Motorcyclist Association. And actually, Eric, I really liked what you had to say, because I have seen this with a lot of our folks are volunteers, and they get engaged in these processes. They take years. And so just even getting them to have realistic expectations at the onset is already a battle, and getting them to realize that this is not a 6 months process even. So following up on that, I wanted, number one, I know when the Forest Service was doing this as well, this was a concern we had, is does landscape include non-BLM lands? Because we saw a kind of we saw the Forest Service kind of wanting to take on the burden of adjacent county land, state land, private land, and identifying things that, while maybe all of us would agree were things that we were concerned of, or issues, be it habitat or energy development or anything else, they were kind of almost trying to take on the burden of these other lands and mitigate that on the federal land. And so that was a real concern. So that'd be my first question. And then my second question just would be, what is the plan to utilize existing DACs and RACs and other advisory groups that do exist? And maybe we could tweak the formula, or we could try to engage on a broader scale, but not just forgetting those citizen advisory groups that we do have engaged, and figuring out how to best utilize those instead of starting over.
So the first question about whether a landscape includes adjacent lands, I think the answer is it depends. There's obviously limits to what a federal agency, how far it can reach, of course, or how far it would even be appropriate to consider. But that being said, there are examples where the BLM is already engaging in planning outside of BLM lands. I believe the DRECP is an example of where this is being done successfully, from what I hear. The sage grouse amendments, this is happening already. Those are the two examples that come immediately to mind. So this is something that we're already learning to do, and we already recognize as important, is thinking outside the boundaries. But again, there are limits.
And I would just add, we're not about trying to manage lands that somebody else manages, but rather to recognize that, that we need to collaborate with those management agencies who are our neighbors, and hear from them and listen to them. We do that already as cooperating agencies on a lot of this. I think some of the DRECP, for example, was done on a larger scale with the state of California. And so that's something we're very open to, if that's useful, and the other land managers find it useful. And I do think it's kind of, often these boundaries are somewhat artificial when you think about the uses of the landscape itself. So that's just something we try to keep in mind.
And the second question was about using existing citizens advisory groups and that kind of thing, regional advisory groups.
Yeah, such as the RACs, I believe he said. Yes, the RACs are very important already, and play a very important role, and I think we'll continue to engage them and look for new ways to engage them as we move forward.
Okay, I don't see hands up in the air. There's one. Is there another? Because we'll have one here. You all in the back are awfully quiet. So remember, this is a time for clarification, and then we'll go into our next session. Yeah.
Yeah, Dave Steindorf with American Whitewater. Lots been said today already about using the concept of adaptive management. And while we would agree that it can be an effective tool in trying to manage in, complex and uncertain environments, in our experience, and we've worked with it quite a bit over the years, it can also be an effective tool at just kicking difficult decisions down the road. So just a cautionary tale, kind of going back to what Eric said earlier, end of the day, there's some tough decisions that need to be made. And using the tools out there that are appropriate to help gather the information when necessary is good, but also be a little cautionary tale to make sure that you don't just use those tools to avoid making the hard decisions up front when that's in fact what needs to happen. And then we have some specific comments about how to make adaptive management most effective, but I'll save those for the small group.
Thank
Great.
you. And I believe we have some people on the web when you,
Oh, do we
you
have?
get around.
Good. Okay, it's your turn.
Can I get this turned on? Oh, or okay. So we just have one question from the web, and it's actually I think a fairly specific question, but talking about what type of public notice or involvement will be required, and specifically whether Planning 2.0 is considering changes to the Federal Register notice requirements.
I'm not sure I understood the first half. What type of notice for what?
What type of public notice or involvement would be required for RMP amendments? So public notice.
Sure. You know, we are looking at the Federal Register notice process, and if there's places we can reduce redundancies in Federal Register notices, I think we would like to do that just to speed things along. But we would always have a provision for notification to the public through, multiple media sources, newspapers, whatever it takes, to get information out to the local level, regional level, national level. And so I think that's really this, while we may want to get rid of a redundant official notice process and look at that, and that's not saying we're going to, we're just going to look at it, we would always still publish press releases, news releases, media outlet publishing, and things like that. So,
Great, thank
would,
you.
I would be very curious to hear in the breakout sessions too if people have ideas on what are other ways that are successful or the best ways to reach a diverse public with notices.
Yes, that'll be an important question that we'll be asking. Yeah.
How's it going? Jordan Kelly, Amargosa Conservancy Executive Director. I just have a quick question. It's a statement on prioritizing for BLM. So we had a wild and scenic river management plan that was given to us as a grant in 2009, and nothing moved forward after the first year because of all the solar permits that went in. So now we successfully applied for extension, but it's only like a three-month extension. What is BLM going to do when this sort of case happens again? So what happened is that BLM Barstow was just underfunded, understaffed, pushed it back, and now it's 5 years and nothing's changed. So that's it. Yeah.
I don't think I know enough about that actual example to speak to it. I don't know if
And that is one of the things that today isn't about. And I meant to say this at the very beginning, that there are a lot of very specific things that you all have in your mind, specific planning processes and the sage grouse and this and that. And what we're trying to do here is extract principles and extract what is and what isn't working about specific processes about, what ideas you have about how things might work better, and not the issue specifics themselves. Is there a mic over in this side? Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Bob Bruner, Coalition for Nevada Wildlife, wanted to reinforce a couple things that were said, of course, with data and with working with the Forest Service. The state wildlife agencies have scientific data. They have plans on the same lands that you have, and so I think a formal statement of when you're going to sit down with the agencies that are adjacent and also that are actively having plans on the same land should be a part of the process. I think, Linda, another thing you might take a look at from the outside here is take a look at the accountability We've got several issues with different interpretations in different districts on the same rules, okay? Fire and wilderness, in last year, we had 3 different responses with 3 different interpretations of the same, okay? So those are some of the things I think you can take a look at. And I think if I was going to have a question, you know, you're talking about speed and how fast we can change this thing and how we're going to move. My only question would be something like how does this change, or how does this react if, say, the sage grouse is listed? Does that just move it to a different priority and everything else shifts? You rewrite everything? I don't know. How would this process be affected by the listing?
Can you answer this as a general, or would you like to put this question elsewhere?
In general, should the sage grouse be listed, then they would, the process from the Fish and Wildlife Service would designate critical habitat and come up with recovery plans. At that point, we would be moving into a mode of how do we incorporate the recovery plans and the critical habitat allocations, designations into our plans, and then accommodate it, you know, moving forward there and see what decisions might need to be changed or revised because of that significant change in circumstance.
On that, I would just add that for right now, a lot of people in BLM and Fish and Wildlife Service and a lot of other state agencies and state wildlife agencies are working very, very hard to try to, I think everyone shares the goal of avoiding a listing. I don't know anyone who's looking forward to a listing, and we're very hopeful that we can achieve that. So that work is ongoing, and it's taking a lot of BLM's resources. We're very committed to trying to do, you know, what we can there. So it's very much a hypothetical for us now to imagine what a listing might. Yeah, and on the consistency point, I think that's a great point, something that's very firmly in our minds too, and part of what we hope to move towards in this planning process as well.
So this will be the last question, okay?
Yeah, Don Amador with the Blue Ribbon Coalition, and just wanted to encourage the agency to be sure and spend time on developing a robust narrative, because just like the Forest Service, particularly from the recreation interests, their initial planning ruled narratives, and even today, very short on recreation goals and objectives. So I'd encourage the agency to spend time so the various stakeholders, when they read the narrative, to me, that's one of the most important parts of the document, because that's where that particular stakeholder group will get an inkling of where your planning document is going. So spend extra time developing that narrative.
Good, thanks. It sounds like that's a recommendation. Doesn't need to be responded to. Okay. Thank you all. And now we're going to go into our next part of this. And let me explain it to you. We're going to have 4 tables on 4 corners. This first table is going to be facilitated by Greg Bourne. Would you wave your hand in the air? And so we want people at that table. This table will be facilitated by Gina. Katie will be at that table, and Peter will be the facilitator at that table. So your job, the rest of you in this room, is to apportion yourselves 10 to a table or 9 at each one of those 4 tables, and try very hard not to be with people whom you know well and you work with every day, because we want to have the most robust and varied conversation we can. Now, one more thing before you stand up, please. You get to have a break. And so what we'd like, but wait, what we'd like you to do before you go for the break, stop. We want you to be back here in 10 minutes. So look at your watches and be at one of these 4 tables in 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
And I would just add, for the people who are online, we do have a WebEx breakout group that's happening. There's information in that handout that you can download on the upper right-hand corner. And Li Shen will be facilitating that.